Hi there, I'm Philip Eidson, the founder of Art of Procurement. And at Art of Procurement, we help procurement professionals like you plan and deliver change with confidence. Whether it's through the mapping and prioritization of your change journey, securing the subject matter expertise that you need to help you along the way, or assisting you and your team to take action on what they learn, and what's really important is on also what they already know. And of course, a big part of what we do is this weekly podcast where we share strategies and tactics that aim to inspire and help elevate your change journey. I want to thank you for joining me today. Let's go straight into the show. Hi there, everybody. Welcome to episode 239 of the Art of Procurement podcast. Before I go into the details of today's show, I'm excited to let you know about a Kickstarter campaign. Yep, you heard that right, a Kickstarter campaign that we launched today. Now, as far as we know, it's the first time that a procurement product or a procurement service has ever been crowdfunded. But our opinion, we can't create something new by traveling on well-worn paths. So I'm not going to go into all the details today. I'm going to give you a link at the end where you can go and check out a little bit more details. But I do want to share just a couple of things. The product itself that we're building is called the 60-Minute Catalyst. It's a series of 10 built-for-you lunch and learn sessions that comes with everything you need in the box to run your own sessions across a number of different procurement topics. We're also launching a community version of the 60-Minute Catalyst where you can send as many of your team, and the number is unlimited, to join a monthly session, same topic, that we actually facilitate here at Art of Procurement. We're raising between now and March the 8th $50,000 to fund the creation of the 60-Minute Catalyst. We're using crowdfunding because it actually allows us to sell the product at a much lower price point than the traditional product development process. That's going to allow us to get into more people's hands, which is going to broaden its impact. And really, that's what we're really passionate about. Now, we're going to be talking more about this over the next few days, but if it sounds interesting, if I've piqued your interest, we do have a limited number of early bird packages available. But to check out all the details of this Kickstarter campaign for the 60-Minute Catalyst, go to artofprocurement.com/Kickstarter. That's artofprocurement.com/Kickstarter. That's going to direct you to our page on the Kickstarter site. For the interview today, I'm joined by Andrew Daley. Andrew is founding director and leader of the procurement practice at Edbury Daley, a recruiting company specializing in the procurement and spend management space. Long-time listeners will know Andrew. He's shared his talent and recruiting insights with us on multiple occasions over the past 3.5 years. In this interview, we discuss how the risk-averse nature of hiring managers is actually limiting the potential impact of procurement organizations, and why both our role definition and our hiring processes need to be rethought. I'm going to start by asking Andrew for his opinion on the current health of the procurement profession.
I think overall, this profession's in pretty good shape, really, Phil. I don't think anything materially different has necessarily been done in 2018 that wasn't done in the 2 or 3 years immediately preceding that. But I think what is very encouraging is the opportunities that are on the horizon for the profession to really make a difference, in areas beyond what perhaps it's historically done. So, if you take the UK, for example, obviously the news agenda is dominated by Brexit at the moment. So for procurement and supply chain, depending on what actually happens, and that is obviously very much up in the air. But there is definitely a perception in the marketplace that there is an opportunity for procurement and supply chain to really make a big impact as organisations adapt to the changes that will come about if we do end up leaving the EU. So certainly in FMCG and other sectors like pharma, etc., they're sort of all on standby, ready to help their organisations adapt to whatever challenges exist as we exit and then go through the transition period, really.
If you take Brexit out of the equation, which I know it right now, and as we're recording this, towards the end of December, and it's so unclear as to what the next steps are and what's going to happen in 3 months. But perhaps by the time the podcast comes out, there's a little bit more clarity. Take away what I would consider short to medium term, at least from a workload perspective, activities. From a structural perspective, is anything changing in procurement?
I think technology is the big sort of factor to consider here. Obviously, it's something we're very passionate about in our organisation, and so technology and the power of the technology in the latest generations of software that's coming out. And it seems to me there's almost like a step up every 2 or 3 months in what can be done. That is the big opportunity that exists for the profession, and I think there's a real scope for upskilling, for a redefinition of what the profession can bring to organisations, and at recent events that I've been to, particularly the SAP Ariba event that I attended in London in October, a lot of the conversation was dominated by the opportunity that exists, and it really being a real time for the leaders of the profession to grasp the opportunity and sort of dictate the agenda. And part of that was around the evolution of the skill set and what it will look like in future. Part of it was around, the automation of some aspects of procurement, particularly tactical, and how that would free up time and resource for more strategic value-add activities. And there's a lot of conversation around what they might look like, which I found very interesting, and the skills and experience required to deliver that, which of course is a subject close to my heart. And to me, that's the other thing which really paints a very positive picture for the profession, because the early adopters, so to speak, there are examples when you go to big events like procurement leaders, for example. There are examples of sort of visionary leaders who are at the forefront of embracing the power of the technology, and they've got the sort of the mandate from their board to invest and train and adopt these solutions, or train their people to adopt these solutions, and they're delivering big results, and so they're setting the benchmark for others to follow, really.
What are the so as you go to the events, you mentioned a couple there in procurement leaders and SAP Ariba. I think it's Ariba Live, isn't it?
Well, Ariba Live was in Amsterdam back in, I think it was April or May. And that was a real showcase of what the solutions were doing. This particular event that I referred to was run as a UK-only event, so it was a bit smaller.
Okay.
And it wasn't as salesy,
It wasn't about them or the product so much.
No, it was really interesting, actually. So Ariba Live, there's so much about what the solution is doing now and what it's going to do. And it wasn't a really aggressive sell. It was a showcasing of the capability, really, to ideas to get people excited and take the message back to their organisations of what can be achieved in future. This smaller one-day event was more about wheeling out some very interesting professionals and for them to present about what they saw as the future vision of procurement. So it wasn't they weren't doing a sales pitch about their tools. They were basically saying this is what could be achieved when we embrace the technology. So, for example, I was fortunate enough to be invited to go on stage with Graham Wright from IBM. He's one of their procurement leaders in the UK. And he presented their vision for the future skill set of procurement in IBM, and it was described as sort of consultative sourcing. And I was very impressed by what he had to say around what they want to achieve moving forward and how they're going to upskill their people to deliver that.
What were some of the messages? I'd love for you to share kind of some of the things specifically that you heard at the event, or perhaps companies who you saw doing interesting things. Like, what are the kind of things that they were experimenting with?
Well, this IBM one, which I was involved in, was perhaps the best one for me to give you an example of. So, again, they talked about a lot of tactical activities being automated. And focus on the value add and talk about what that would be. And so really, this consultative sourcing, to me, the essence of it is really moving on from what we've always talked about, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder relationship management, taking that on a stage really to business partnering, whereby there's just a shift in an emphasis of the relationship. And that then facilitating more strategic activities like supplier collaboration, like seeking out innovation from the supplier base, and perhaps developing a broader view of the commercial impact of procurement activities rather than being siloed within an individual department. So what that meant was that, the people would be supported by training and development to give them that broader base and to give them the softer skills to develop the business partnering thing, but also sort of almost like an entrepreneurial mentality. To give a very simple example, you've got a supplier who's got a game-changing piece of tech. They can supply you, or they can supply your direct competitor.
Yeah.
How are you going to make sure it's going to be you and not your direct competitor?
Yeah. So
that engages a sort of more entrepreneurial mentality, I think. Now, that wasn't specifically what IBM was saying, but that's my interpretation of what they were saying, or my slant on it, if you will. But one thing that I thought was fascinating was, obviously IBM have got the Watson AI tool. So I think they'll be making great use of that. And one real example for procurement professionals to think about is, if you were to be working for IBM in the procurement department, and you think about the size and scope of that organisation globally, so they can use the Watson tool almost to be your personal watchdog for opportunities within the organisation. So you might log on to what we used to call an intranet, but your internal sort of career site within IBM, and the AI tool is capable. Watson is capable of presenting you with opportunities that might really give you career progression within the organisation. And so you've constantly got Watson effectively doing this work and using AI, machine learning, etc., to really sort of take all the legwork out of keeping an eye on potential opportunities. Now, an organisation the size of IBM, that could really open up all sorts of opportunity. It could increase geographical mobility, give people chances in different parts of the organisation, also bring people from other departments into procurement, bringing different skill sets. And I just felt that was incredibly powerful for people development, but also, as I am my world, hugely sort of powerful when it comes to staff attraction, talent attraction, and staff retention. In a market for competitive skills, developing people on this line of consultative sourcing, the next generation of procurement, and constantly giving them opportunities to further their careers internally. That would be great to keep people, but also if you're able to go and say to somebody at interview, this is what you'll get when you join IBM. I just thought that was, I just thought that was the best vision I've seen so far of the future of procurement, and also really backing up what a lot of procurement leaders talk about, but their actions don't always back up the words, around prioritising talent.
Yeah. I was going to ask you as well, and it's a nice segue into that. You talked about soft skills, and I know that we talk a lot about that on the show, of skill sets for the future of procurement and how we need to evolve. And one, I'm interested in kind of your view of that as well, and your experience in some of those skills that are necessary, but also kind of backing onto that. Like, does that desire or vision for those skill sets match the reality of what procurement leaders are actually asking for?
If I rewind back to when I first started recruiting procurement people in the late 90s, Phil, the top of the list in those days was always stakeholder engagement skills, and the second was usually some sort of category expertise. And going back then, the negotiation skills were still, really high up on the agenda. But I don't think stakeholder engagement has ever really shifted far from that top of the list for most hiring managers, because of the value and importance of it when it comes to sort of extending procurement's influence across an organisation. Yeah. And I mentioned before about business partnering, so I think that's what it's going to evolve into. So we need to develop even greater influence over budget holders and such like in the organisation. It's always been there. It's always been a challenge to find people that can really adapt to new cultures of organisations and make a big impact in that area. And so it's always been a skills shortage, or perceived skills shortage, for the profession. And I don't think enough training and development is done to support the evolution of that particular skill set personally.
Do you think that how can somebody show or demonstrate that they can work across cultures and they can work across industry? Because a lot of folks I see hiring people, that they really only want to hire people from their own industry, and that one, limits the available talent pool, but two, really discredits some of the diversity of thought and experiences that someone from the outside may have. But it's hard sometimes to demonstrate that, I am flexible and I can just apply my same transferable skills to any industry.
It's very difficult to demonstrate that. And I think that actually comes back to the mentality of the hiring manager and the HR professionals involved. I mean, if you look at some of the organisations that really recruit well, they put a greater emphasis on transferable skills over the obvious box ticking exercise. So to give a very simplistic example, the simplest recruitment model in the world is go and get the person doing the same job for the competitor down the road and pay them a bit more. And that, from my personal perspective, is irritatingly prevalent in the marketplace. I love it when a hiring manager says to me, look, I want to bring somebody in a bit different. I want to bring somebody different to what I've already got. We need a fresh injection of ideas. But, people are generally quite risk-averse in hiring. And look for the person who's going to hit the ground running quickly rather than the person who perhaps might take a little bit of time to adapt to a new industry or organisation or category, but longer term, because they're bringing different ideas and expertise, will contribute more.
Yeah, and in different ways.
Yeah, indeed. So unfortunately, I think it comes down to the risk-averse nature of hiring managers wanting to just take that sort of perceived safe bet.
Yeah. Now, are there things that that hiring managers can do to minimize that risk, that propensity to risk, as they're looking for candidates, that doesn't just suggest that they're going to go through the well-trodden path? Like, how do you help hiring managers think a little bit more out of the box in terms of the kind of candidates to look for?
So I think one of the challenges around hiring, sort of having a different mentality for hiring, coming back to the hiring managers, because this move away from this very one-dimensional, safe bet sort of mentality of hiring the person who does the same job for the competitor down the road. And it comes down to the hiring manager realising that where the value is. Yeah. So when I get a chance to have that conversation with the client, it's usually at the very, very start of a recruitment process where you're able actually to influence the thinking rather than... sometimes people come to us because they've tried their internal team or they've tried advertising, they've not found what they wanted, and so they think, okay, we'll try this recruiter. These people seem to know what they're talking about. But actually, if you start at the very beginning and scope out a role effectively, then that can make a big difference. So I think I mentioned to you previously, we've got a case study that we're quite proud of at the moment, and it was a hire that we made for a FTSE 250 company, and the thing they did really well was they came to us before the role was even signed off. Now, they wanted to make an appointment in procurement tech. It's around their use of data and particularly developing a spend analytics strategy. And what they did really well was they came to us with a concept of what they wanted to achieve. And they discussed with us what was a realistic scope of the role, bear in mind the available skills in the marketplace. And then we talked about what skills and experience were realistically available to me in the sort of ballpark figures they had in mind for the salaries. And we talked about the geographical spread, and we talked about supply and demand, and we talked about what it would take to actually attract somebody into this role. And throughout that conversation, we were then able to sort of debate the relative merits of somebody doing a data job outside of procurement versus somebody who's been in procurement and perhaps has got a different background. And we debated 3 or 4 particular types of profiles. And then when the hiring manager who contacted me went back to his stakeholders and HR internally, he was able to have that conversation armed with accurate information about the job market, so that when they decided what they wanted, they'd weighed up all the options and they had a preferred channel and they had a sort of second choice type channel, both of which had their strengths and weaknesses. But they really explored the possibilities, and that opened their mind a little bit to taking people from less obvious backgrounds who might bring different skills. And ultimately, we took somebody from outside of the profession altogether. He'd had some exposure to procurement, but he was a data scientist who'd worked in a variety of different sort of business areas within his previous employer. And that was quite a departure for them to not hire somebody who'd worked in a dedicated procurement team previously. But what they tell me is he's doing a great job. They're very pleased with the hire. But that all started right at the very beginning of the process by really just trying to understand what their options were and opening their minds to various different types of backgrounds.
Yeah, it's like thinking about the outcomes. We do that in the services side of procurement and selling procurement services. You're always thinking about outcomes, but I think you think about that less in hiring because you look at it more as a job spec. and work to be done rather than what you're trying to achieve from it. And it sounds like they really went from the off saying, this is what I want to achieve. Now let's work backwards and find the kind of person that will help us do that.
Yeah, indeed.
You talked about how tight the procurement technology market is for hiring, and I know that that's a theme within your the latest procurement and spend management insider guide that you put together, and I'm going to link to that in the show notes at the end of the episode so people can go and take a look. Is that where the money's going right now?
It's starting to, yeah. It's starting to. So I can fit organisations broadly into two camps, and I'd include both the consultancies and the solution providers in this sort of definition. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, you've got some organisations that have recognised that the skills shortage and have really sort of raised the game with the recruitment, and part of that has been a willingness to pay top of what we might consider to be market rate, or in some cases even beyond that, because they recognise that lack of resource, lack of people, is a constraining factor in growth. Yeah. So they've taken the view that we need to do this, otherwise we're not going to start to be able to service these hard-won clients that we're acquiring. And then you've got those organisations that haven't reached that point yet, that are still sort of constrained by their traditional internal salary bands, and that's making it difficult for them to recruit certain skill sets, or possibly also recruit, the very top end of the sort of talent pool. And actually, we've done some research work for 2 or 3 of the vendor providers this year, whereby they've realised that their salaries are a little bit out of kilter with the marketplace. And one of the reasons why they've realised that is because they've lost people to direct competitors who've gone and got paid a lot more elsewhere. And they're fearful of not only not being able to recruit replacements, but also possibly losing more valued staff.
Right.
So they've asked us to really sort of benchmark what is actually realistically getting paid in the procurement tech market at the moment, and it's not made for pretty reading for some of them. But that's seen in the consultancy markets as well. I think in the corporate, in the end users, it's still the demand is still growing at a slower pace, shall we say, because a lot of those guys are able to lean on consultancies and vendors to support them in their transition. But you're starting to see more and more roles get hired for internally, albeit the growth is not quite as quick as I would like, obviously. Mm-hmm. But the money's not jumping up to quite the same extent yet, because those jobs are so few and far between. There's actually people are sort of really keen to get those jobs when they come on the market. So money's not always the deciding factor in those sort of decisions for those people going for those jobs. But to answer your original question, there's certainly salary growth in solution providers and some of the consultancies. Yeah,
it's interesting that from a practitioner perspective, like, it shows perhaps the trends with the adoption of technology. The adoption of technology is still generally pretty low, except for those organizations that you've either got those that are dipping the toe in the water, which aligns with, the roles that do come on board are interesting when they do come about, but they're kind of few and far between as people are experimenting. And then you have on the service provider, they're supporting people who have fully bought into new technology, and there's a pretty limited supply of talent. Which means those who don't get the best people, you're not finding enough people quick enough to come up to that standard, and it's a little bit of a vicious cycle by the sounds of it. You lose out to the best people, there isn't really that talent pool behind them yet to fill in at that same level.
Yeah, quite right, Phil, quite right. And I've had a number of conversations, particularly with consultancies, around the fact that it's very difficult to solve this problem in the short term. So they need to be looking at their medium and long-term strategy around talent in this area. So if you take the consultancies that are trying to ride the Ariba and Cooper waves with the implementation and transformation projects that support the adoption of these tools, my message to those people is we've got to look at ways of expanding the talent pool. Yeah. Can't just keep, Big Four can't just keep pinching each other's staff, right, and expecting that to sustain a growth in digital procurement, in the digital procurement community, really. So, obvious things that the Big Four and others like them do very well is training graduate talent. Yeah. So, I'm saying to the big consultancies, get your fair share of the best graduates each year and train them and retain them and give them reasons to stay with your organisation. I'm saying you need to be a little bit more open-minded about maybe taking people who might have, let's say, somewhere between 3 and 8, 9, 10 years experience post-graduation in corporates, but have perhaps got the skill set to transfer over, which goes back to our earlier discussion around, sort of caution in hiring, rather than getting somebody who's already got consulting experience, which is their obvious preference. In the absence of suitable candidates, there are people who can make that transition, who have got the good softer skills around relationship management, who do understand the concept of change management and transformation. And with a little bit of investment in time and patience, those people can become very good consultants in a reasonable time frame. So I'm really encouraging some of the consultants to consider those sorts of profiles.
Yeah. Do you find there's a lot of demand on the practitioner side to go into roles that are in consulting or in with the technology providers?
For the consultants, if you talk about the big consultants, they're still relatively wedded to their traditional model of wanting previous consulting experience. Mm-hmm. But certainly some of the conversations I've had, particularly very, very recently, almost like in December this year, a couple of them are sort of starting to see my point of view and starting to recognise that it's going to constrain their growth if they don't start to look at different channels of hiring people. We've actually had some real success already with some of the solution providers. So, for example, they're not quite so precious about previous consulting experience. So I've moved a few people who are practitioners who've had decent exposure to the use of procurement tech into some of the vendors this year, and they're really enjoying those roles. So they sort of, their view is, they sit in a client-facing role now on behalf of, an Ariba, for example, and they're able to say to customers, I've been where you are, I understand the challenges you face, the roadblocks rather, that you've got to get over. And that empathy they can show with the customers is very valuable. So they really understand the procurement world and they understand the tech. And of course, people like Ariba train them very well as well. Mm. And so they then become very quickly really valuable resources in client-facing roles whereby they can really sort of support clients through the change process. So I'm seeing that in quite a big way. I've been working on a lot of projects like that myself, and I think that's a really good move from the likes of Ariba and more to do that.
Right. That's so I made that jump from a practitioner into a service provider. And I think I look back and what were some of the things that I did to prepare myself for it. And it was definitely kind of taking that service provider mindset even within the internal organization. So you stop thinking about yourself as a procurement professional as more as, I own a business within a business. And I'm going to start thinking that way. I think that's something that, at least in my experience, if you're wanting to make a move over to the service provider side, is something that folks look for. They look for the mentality, the ability to kind of switch quickly between different stakeholders because you're working with different clients all the time. And it's just a little bit of a different pace as well, isn't it, when you make that switch?
I couldn't agree more. Starting to embrace that mindset. And also embarking on some self-education whereby you can read around the subject, you can watch videos, you can network with people, and really get as many different sort of takes on what it takes to transition from one side of the fence to the other. That really helps you understand what's required, and I think that then positions you well when you do want to make that move. Yeah. If you sat in an interview and you're able to say to a hiring manager, this is what I've done to prepare myself to make this transition. You're starting to take away a little bit of that perceived risk rather than the hiring manager. So, changing your thought process and adopting an approach to self-education, I think, are the two biggest things that people can do to help facilitate that. Yeah.
Now, one of the comments that is in the report that was interesting to me is you said that it's rare, or it seems rare now, where a candidate can learn on the job. And I just wondered if you could provide a little bit more context on that. Is that related to supply and demand in the market, or does it go back to that risk aversion? Like, people want somebody who's going to make an impact now.
I think it's the latter point. They're both relevant. I think the latter point is probably the dominant one. Mm-hmm. That comment actually came from my colleague Peter Brophy. Now, Peter has done quite a lot of work this year on leadership roles. So, heads of procurement, directors of procurement, not quite a massive CPO, but certainly some pretty chunky leadership roles. And then also some direct reports into CPO. So really senior people, good salaries, strong pedigrees, and good backgrounds. And what he's found is that, what sort of backs up that point about not allowing people to grow into the role is that he's seeing a preference for people making sideways moves rather than that next step in their career on an upwards trajectory. Mm-hmm. And I do think that comes back to a degree of risk aversion. So if you take a director of procurement type job, there are so many people who, have got impressive CVs, but they've not quite had that first leadership job. And of course they aspire to. They get to a certain level where the next move needs to be that leadership job. Hiring managers favouring candidates making sideways moves rather than that sort of upward step in their career into a bigger job. So to give an example, you've got a sort of director of procurement type job, and there are lots of people with strong CVs who aspire to that sort of job, but they've not had a leadership role previously. They might have had a really good job reporting to a CPO. That next step for them is to branch out on their own and become the functional leader. And there are a lot of people like that in the market who've got strong backgrounds, but hiring managers are sort of turning away from that sort of profile in favour of somebody with existing previous leadership experience. And then just to go on to a stage further with that, it's often the case that rather than maybe someone wants a bigger leadership job than the previous one they had, whether it be spend or the size of the organisation or whatever, however you want to measure the scope, they want somebody who's dealt with those sorts of dimensions previously. Mm-hmm. So it's somebody who's not actually going into a bigger job. It's just somebody who's ready for a new challenge. And so hiring managers are quite risk averse, and they're not wanting somebody who perhaps is going to take a bit of time to get to grips with a new job, but has got the ambition, desire, and maybe long term could be a great asset to the organisation. They're more favouring the tried and trusted sort of safe bet again.
Right.
And that's what Pete saw in a number of the senior roles that he had this year, and what prompted to make that point that it seems people can't learn on the job anymore. They can't grow into a role.
Does that change the hiring or the career ladder below that? Because then you have this population of people who are struggling to make the step up. And I'm sure there's a frustration.
Yeah.
There's a frustration with that.
Yeah. Because they might be in a great job in a good organisation. Yeah. So the only real job they're going to move for is the one that satisfies that career ambition of moving to the next step up the ladder. And you've already got a problem in that the natural pyramid nature of corporate structures means there's usually only one top job in any function. Yeah. So there's already a scarcity of those jobs anyway. And then you take out the fact that some of them will never go to people who've not had that previous leadership experience. That means the people who aspire to those jobs, and these are some of the people who really get in touch with me, really trying to scale the market for that next career opportunity. They really find it frustrating, the lack of opportunities for them to get serious consideration. And then add in that, a few procurement leadership jobs do actually go to internal appointees who actually come from outside the function.
Right.
So, good leadership jobs on the open market are few and far between.
Yeah, I was going to follow that up with a question about, when you're looking at CPO roles or head of procurement roles, anecdotally, I see more and more people get hired from outside of procurement into the top role. I know you just mentioned it there. Is that something that you're seeing kind of as a trend, or is it just dependent on the organisation?
That, again, is a very good question. I think it has been a trend, which is there's certainly more of that around than there used to be, I would say. I can't really back that up with any data, unfortunately, Phil, but I think anecdotally, I do think that is something which I've seen more of. You'll see somebody come out of a senior finance role or similar, and that's career progression internally for that person, which semi-contradicts the point I just made about people not being given time to step up. But actually, because they're a proven performer in an organisation, again, they're perceived as lower risk. And the thing is, in a leadership position, you're not in the coalface negotiating. you're leading and coordinating a team and trying to deliver a strategy. And people who've got to that level in organisations are perceived to have the intellectual capacity to do that. So I think it's not unusual for some decent sized jobs now to go to outside the profession.
Yeah, I think some of it is tied to the perceived maturity of the procurement function. I say perceived because, that's an important word, because it's perceived by the people who are making the decisions to put those, the non-procurement leaders in those positions, where there's perhaps a feel that business alignment isn't what it could be. And so it will be more effective to bring somebody in who understands the business and can figure out how to best connect this resource of procurement talent that we have with the business, as opposed to bringing somebody else who's got that more of the more procurement mindset, if you will.
Yeah, indeed, I agree with that. And I think the other thing is that for a lot of organisations, procurement is still struggling to move beyond a completely savings-dominated agenda, and maybe bringing somebody who understands the organisation, understands a different perspective, might be able to start heading them and push them in that direction.
When you talk to people who are interested in taking on new roles or, advancing their career, do you sense any concern that their skill sets are becoming commoditized or automated, and that the desire is to get into more impactful roles or to be embracing the technologies and the changes? Or is it just more the traditional, hey, I'd like a better job, I'd like a little bit more money and a little bit more responsibility?
I think the latter, that sort of older school mentality, is still more common than the former. Mm-hmm. And I put that down to the fact that when you're in the system of, that's the way it is culturally in the profession and within your organisation, it's difficult to take a step outside of that and actually see what's going on in the wider world. Yeah. And that's something I think people should do more of, not just procurement professionals, because there's so many resources available to people now online, etc., that can help you do that. But there are certain types of people that are conscious that the technology is really changing our world and our profession, and parts of their job could become automated. So where does that leave us? I'm seeing that in finance as well as procurement, and perhaps more so in finance than procurement. P2P, accounts payable, all that sort of thing. So I think there's a real need for people to start trying to look forward a few years down the line as to where their careers will be, and start making that much more a factor in their decision making, rather than I'm a bit bored where I am. Right. I think I'm thinking worth a bit more money, or I need a new challenge, or whatever other driver is sort of pushing things. So when people come to me, that's still a prevalent sort of mindset. I think, to distinguish from that, though, there is some evidence that when I'm going to the people, so when I'm actually headhunting, and I'm actually speaking to what we in recruitment call passive talent, i.e. people who aren't actually looking for a new job, there's a bit more recognition as to what might drive a well thought out career move than just those traditional push and pull factors that we're all aware of and been around for years.
Because we talked about career ladders a little bit, and when you think of the top level, maybe it's maybe it'll always be a procurement person who's got a background in procurement that gets that top job. Maybe it'll be somebody from outside. It's probably going to be a mix, just depending on the company. But that role exists. But below it, we're starting to talk about bringing people from outside the profession. It just seems like. And yet, for the director roles, you talked about people who just wanting to hire people sideways rather than giving them a move up. So there's a lot of, friction, I guess, in the career ladder. And you start to think about technology, and as technology starts to take out the bottom rungs of the ladder, what are you left with? You're left with, hopefully roles that are a lot more influential in the organization, but they're individual contributor roles. So there's going to be less, I want to build a team, and I want to mobilize a team, at least in my opinion, and I'd love your perspective, in terms of what the jobs are going to be that's available in the future.
I think we'll probably move to smaller departments with sort of more individual contributors, as you put it, bigger hitters, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I think people who are serious about advancing their career in the long term in the profession need to think very carefully about what their skill set they've got now is and what they think they need to evolve into if they're going to really survive the changes over the next few years. And the bottom end of it, the sort of transactional stuff, that is really a threat from the technology. Yeah. There's no two ways about it. There's no easy way to dress that up. And so it's real emphasis. And I think the other thing is that at the moment, companies aren't investing in training and development like they used to. So I don't know if you read the Deloitte CPO report from earlier this year, but there's some really alarming stats in there about the lack of investment in training and development. So my message to a lot of people is, look, the resources are out there. You need to really push yourself to decide what you want to do, get yourself a plan together, and dedicate the time, which is part of the challenge when we've all got busy lives, but dedicate the time to some self-improvement, some self-education, because there will come a point whereby the top organisations, move towards a sort of model that I mentioned with IBM earlier on in the conversation, whereby it's a more sophisticated procurement professional with a wider range of skill set and a better knowledge of what technology can do, who wants to deliver more value to its stakeholders. And I think that's the message from the Ariba event, which is where procurement should be heading. And if you want your career to survive that transition, then you've got to start doing something about it.
Yeah, learning and development is really interesting. We built a product at Procurement to kind of try and solve for that need of not having the time to invest in new development, but needing the accountability and needing to at least understand what's going on out there and how you can start taking action on it. But that Deloitte report, we did an article on it as well, because it seemed like, there's kind of two camps of organizations. There's those that have just invest kind of, I'd say, the same amount of money each year in the same things in learning and development, and they're realizing the effectiveness is going down, and because the effectiveness is going down, then there's no ROI, and so they're cutting back their investment. And then there's those that are actually investing a little bit more, and they're investing in different things, and because they're investing in different things, they're actually seeing the impact of that, and it's making the business case for them to continue. So it's like a have and a have not almost. The ones that are looking at doing something different and aren't afraid of experimenting are really continuing to see the value in investing in helping their teams in learning and development. And those that aren't are just seeing, like, what's the point? Because the same stuff I invest in every year isn't working.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And when you go to these events, you can see the sort of the people that have really made that investment and have reaped the rewards. They're the ones on the stage telling everyone else how great it is. And everyone else is sort of looking on enviously, or in some cases dismissively if they don't believe in it. Yeah. But procurement leaders in London in I think it was June was a classic example there. They brought over a few CPOs from the States, made some fantastic presentations about what they were doing with technology. And you could just see people looking on enviously around the room thinking, God, I wish we'd invest in some of that. But it's the sort of chicken and egg scenario. There was one CPO, I won't name him, but he'd gone into an organisation and he had some, what I thought was ridiculous savings target in the first quarter of his employment. I think he had to deliver something like $120 million. And he nearly hit it. He got to about 114, 115. So you imagine the message he was able to take back to the board at the end of the first quarter of employment and the impact that would have on their belief in him and the trust. So he asked this guy to look at ask for investment in technology and then the training and development to use it. And so they did all that, and then they were able to deliver even more savings and more value. So the board loved him, and then he asked for some more investment in training and development and technology, and he delivered more results. And then got himself into what I call the CPO's virtuous circle, where he had that nice flow of trust, investment, and results that kept delivering more and more. And this is one of the reasons why this guy was on the stage, because he was an absolutely top flight CPO. And you thought, what some of the leaders in the room would give to have that level of backing from the board. But he'd earned that through his performance of directing his people in the right ways early on to prove that he was everything they'd hoped he would be when they hired him. Yeah,
and sometimes it only takes small steps. You don't have to start with a big bang that's going to cost you a lot of money, that's going to put a lot of, even the careers on the line. You can start with small pilot programs around technology, around different approaches to L&D. Pilot those with your teams, learn from them, and then start to implement them at scale when you've got more confidence they're going to work. So there's ways to do it in a risk-averse way, I would say, as opposed to, hey, making a pitch for a lot of money quickly, and when you might not necessarily have that trust.
Yeah, indeed. Well, he was operating on a big scale, and that's the way he told the story. Of course, he told a very good story. I'm sure there was a few bumps in the road that he didn't mention. But
isn't there always?
Of course. But that's not quite as exciting when you're painting a great picture for an audience of 500. But there's another person, a similar thing. He showed some pictures. He had these massive iPad-type screens, and he had 3 procurement hubs in his organisation across the state because he had 3 business divisions, and they had these iPads, and the team were able to go and just, at any time touch the screen and get all sorts of data and spend analytics insights, and that was really driving their performance forward, and it just looked like an amazing place to work, and that the people were so empowered and had all the sort of latest tech at their fingertips, and were, you thought that would be so powerful in my world to be able to say to a candidate when you're headhunting, well, this is what they're doing with spend analytics at the moment. Are your people doing that? And so few people are doing that. It would be a massive magnet for top flight people to go and work there, and obviously driving an awful lot of value. So it is happening, but they are still, in my opinion, still in very much the early adopters, and unfortunately in the minority. Yeah,
and hopefully, as we next time we come to chat, there's more organisations who have embraced that, and we're looking back, and it seems that it's it's kind of a profession, an evolution, transformation of the profession, rather than individual companies doing it. Based on, of course, their own business cases, but that's what I see right now. It's kind of few and far between. It's not something that we're doing en masse as a profession yet. And I think technology will force it. The question will be whether we embrace it, or whether companies embrace it, or whether they are a little bit late to the table.
Yeah, indeed, I agree. I mean, to me, it's all about the speed of change.
Yeah.
So at this present moment in time, if you think about the product adoption curve, the speed of change is still, slower than certainly, the solution providers would like, because of course they want their sales to go up. But I do think it's beginning to gather pace, and I do think it's sort of unavoidable. And companies want to overcome the barriers like legacy systems to actually achieving this. And I think we'll get to a point whereby those that don't will get left behind. But the interesting thing to observe will be the speed of change, and it usually accelerates. I think it's picking up, but I think accelerating. If it's to describe it as it's accelerating already, we'll probably be pushing it a little bit, really.
All right, well, Andrew, I want to really appreciate you for your time today and your insights. I've loved chatting, and as in most of these, I could probably talk for a lot longer, but I know people have only got so much time to listen to the Art of Procurement, so I need to start wrapping up. I want to just ask you a final question, which is, if listeners would like to reach out, connect, learn a little bit more about what you do, where's the best place for them to find you?
So our website is www.edburydaily.com, or you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn. We've also got another website called spendmanagement.co.uk, where we advertise a lot of the roles that we work on, so people can get me at either side of those. Email address is andrew@edburydaily.com. And just really to sort of mirror what you just said, Phil, I'm very grateful for you inviting me to come and talk. Really enjoyed it. Hope it's of interest to the audience, and I hope we can do it again soon. All right,
great. Well, what I'll do is I'll include all the links in our show notes today, so nobody has to write it down while they're driving. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com. Just search for Andrew Daley, and today's episode will come up with all the show notes, the links, along with the last couple that we did as well. So again, just go to artofprocurement.com, search for Andrew Daley, and today's show notes, you'll be able to find them pretty easily. So with all that being said, Andrew, just want to thank you one last time for joining me today.
Thanks, Phil.
Cheers. Hi there. I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.